on this computer. All right. Cool. Welcome to office hours, everyone. Just spend like a few moments just thinking about like this past week, I guess last 2 days, and thinking about if there was anything you felt like you were blocked on, things didn't make sense, you sort of glossed over it because you just wanted to get something done, and maybe bring those up for discussion. Anyone have something? Steve?
I don't know what webpack is.
What webpack
I would
is?
like an intro to webpack. That's something we can do in short amount.
Sure.
We also add like the why.
Why webpack?
Yeah, and why? Yeah, basically. Or just on top of that.
Should I just piggyback off of Steve's question?
But
And what is the use case? Yeah.
can we go over course?
The course request?
And what, why, how, when not, when to. Yeah. Bunch of questions. Yeah.
We couldn't figure out how to get the database to reset between or Casper tests.
Between Casper
I'm not sure
tests?
if it's relevant to everybody specifically.
Okay.
And we can talk about that.
Okay. Let's table that. Let's do it after. Do it as a coaching session.
I think it worked. I have one more question if I can ask.
Yeah, totally.
I would like, so I'm having a pet peeve of having to repeat these virus statements in every single like submodule and make a note app. So I came up with my own way of kind of trying to just kind of follow the rule, no repeated code, and still supply the downstream of apps of scripts with the scopes that they need to function. But I'd like to know, is there like a best practices way to do that, or is it really you just have to repeat the fire statements? To like if you have includes in routes and things.
So if I understand your question, you're saying why do I have to repeat myself and say require module package X?
Versus like some way to do everything common in one place and you guys that scope down to the areas that you.
Okay. So like sort of require like all the files and then export them and then just having to require this at one.
Yes. That's what I ended up doing, but I don't know if it's a hack or if it's perfectly acceptable.
Okay. So what do I type down? So
Or I have another example maybe. Like for example, if you run one mockup test, you're already requiring like expect.
Sure.
Why do you have to require expect on every single mockup?
Sure, that's kind of
Right? That is like, yeah.
does this satisfy that?
Sure. I don't know what driving is.
Oh, dry is do not repeat yourself.
Do not repeat yourself. Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of another way of saying those. Do not repeat yourself. You know that.
It is a software pattern.
Okay. I've done 3 things.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
We've got a question about like achieving full test coverage, because we have like Istanbul running, and it shows that like, okay, like you're testing all your lines of code for this file, but then like this other file, you're like not testing anything, but like it looks like we have tests written that use that. So we're trying to figure out like why Istanbul's not reporting that like we're testing everything.
Okay. That is something probably I would have to look at like code, but we can. Does anyone have like Istanbul tests that I can clone and maybe we can do it like live here?
I think partially too, from what I understand about it, that you have to test all the conditions. Like if there's an if statement, then you have to test all the conditions.
Right.
It's not really
Yeah, that's the kind of things we're trying to figure out. Like how
I
to
think
do.
like Yeah, in our
So
test,
we can talk about how the code coverage tool actually measures code coverage.
and then like testing the
Dot-net catches.
yeah, testing the dot-net catch when you're doing a route test for things like that.
Okay. Does that sort of seem like what you were
Yeah.
saying?
I think that covers like what me and Ben are curious about.
Okay. Yeah.
When you're doing UI test, are you supposed to come up with like a user story, like a full like this file says the user does these steps in this order, and this file has a different user experience? Like, are you supposed to think out what the like
So how,
possibilities of what a user could do?
so is the essence of the question, how do I come up with like a UI test? Like what is the different steps of a UI test?
Yeah, is it broken into a story, or is it literally just testing functionality?
Okay. So do UI tests.
Yeah, like the user clicks this, then navigates that, then this,
Or-
or is it just one thing at a time?
Yeah, and just further explanation.
Yeah.
Like how we should be thinking about our UI tests.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. Let's I think we have a few on board. If anyone thinks of anything, just feel free to interrupt me. I can add more. Okay, so the first question, what is webpack and why do we need it? So webpack is, what is the official definition? Like from my understanding, it is some sort of a build tool that is mainly used for, in the cases that I've used it, it is used when I'm using ES6 and maybe I want to transpile it down to ES5, or if I have, I'm using some sort of a library like React, which is split into multiple files, and I want to compress them down into one file. I've used it in situations where I'm using a different language, so something like CoffeeScript or SAS, right? Like those are things which are not directly understandable by the browser. So you use some sort of a transpiler that converts it from that format to JavaScript or to CSS based on whichever language you're tackling. So webpack is useful in those situations. So it's kind of like a pre-processor for your source code before you actually deploy it to production.
Is that
Or
like
even before you, sorry to interrupt you, or is it, it's also in a situation where even for your local development, you would still need to make that happen. So it's not just for a production config, it's also for a preprocessor for your local environment.
Bundles and transpiles code simultaneously?
So you're specifically talking about bundle.js?
No, I'm saying bundles, webpack bundles and compile simultaneously.
Yeah, it does both of those things, but you will have to tell Webpack to do that. So Webpack has a config, and in that config you specify exactly what you want to do. If you want to do this transpiling, then that's what you would do. If you just want to do, the concatenation of different files, then that's what it does, etc.
So I know with Meteor, I know Meteor sucks. But I know that with Meteor, when I look at the end result, it's actually just one index page, one HTML file, and it includes these clearly created bundles of CSS and JavaScript, like your really long hash strings, and it's just you can have hundreds of scripts, but all that ends up in that page is 2 or 3 JavaScript files, and maybe
you mean lines?
lines,
Yeah.
individual sources. So I'm okay, well, clearly there's and it takes freaking 30 seconds every time you change something to get where you go. So is that what Webpack does?
Totally, yeah. So it's kind of so I think that file was also probably minifying.
Yes.
Right, so it minifies all of the source code, so that way the size of your files is much smaller than the actual unminified version. So you kind of remove all of the white spaces. You change the variable name sometimes. So you change it from a long variable name to a single letter, or so that way your file size gets smaller. And then you have this idea of source maps, which are so in production, if you ever want to debug, if you look at your source files, they're all random off. Yeah, it's gibberish in the end, right? So you need to have this sort of translation between the changed minified variable names to the original ones. So in production, you can actually like look at a like a console error, and then click on it, and it'll take you back to the actual original file, even though it actually has a minified file, because it has this idea of the source maps, which keep track of like the minified variable name to the actual variable.
So the why answer to the question, the answer to why is one, to make something that's not executable, not executable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then two, I guess it's almost like the name implies, I guess. It's almost like you're packaging like a whole project into just tiny, not small necessarily, but fewer files, just like a handful of files to send to production.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So you're creating a bundle, potentially a single file for JavaScript. You're potentially creating a single file for all your CSS. You're creating a, you're basically reducing the size. So that way, the advantage of having single file is when you load your web page, you're only making one web request, right, which loads the whole page. Whereas, like if you had like multiple files that you had to load, you're making multiple requests, and that's much more expensive.
Is it mimicking what like universal apps do, kind of?
What do you mean by universal app?
I heard that like universal apps do like a requesting graph everything, so that way it works faster. But
I'm like not entirely sure what universal app is. Like, is that like a universal app? Is it from the context of JavaScript?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like where it makes a request graph everything happen.
Oh, I see. So it's an isomorphic. Okay. Right. It can render itself on the client and the server. Right. So isomorphic is usually like, since we are running JavaScript on the back end and the front end, you can sometimes share code across both the sides, but not always, because sometimes like your back end is running, let's say ES 2017, right? So some features which are in ES 2017 are not in the browser, right? So some things won't work. But like you want to like sometimes be isomorphic, so that way like your common libraries, for example, like your helper functions. Like if you're making an HTTP request, you want to use the same HTTP function across like your backend as well as the front end, for example. So in that context, yeah. So what was your exact question? Like, when is this a good use case for a universal app? You said?
Or does it make it a universal app?
Or it's just what's the difference? I guess I was getting at.
So universal app has nothing to do with webpack. Webpack is just a way for you to do some pre-processing in your pipeline, in your build pipeline. When you get to the point of actually starting your server, either in development or in production. You just want to execute some function in the middle. That function could be minification. It could be using a transpiler. It could be like anything. But like your thing about universal app is just a separate property of code.
Sharing things that are similar between the front and the back.
Right. So that is the definition of isomorphic, but I'm not completely sure of what universal means. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Oh, okay.
But here they're basically using it together. So I would imagine they're the same. So if I do know what isomorphic is. Isomorphic
optimization. So further step it up.
Right. It's just like basically you have to write lesser code. Right. If you can write code which works on the front end and on the back end, you just have to maintain a lot less code.
Oh.
Yeah. Cool.
So still continuing on webpack though.
Yeah.
I guess understanding why it's actually required, right? So if you have ES6 or whatever, and then you are running in a browser that doesn't support it, like Internet Explorer, will Webpack like make transpile your code to make that readable. Is that like why most people use it, or
So webpack so it doesn't happen for every request. It happens once and for all before your app is deployed to production or whichever server you're running it on, right? So if I decide to transpile it to ES5, then everybody who supports ES5 would work on.
you can determine what it's transpiled to in Webpack.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like maybe, I think in my case, what I'm used to is an Angular app of source code, everything else, and you run a command, and what comes out is a compact node app that you can push to production. Now you couldn't maintain a node app really because it's completely compacted, but maybe that's where webpack will come in between, taking it from pure source in a browser to like server based.
Yeah.
That's I think what I'm most accustomed to seeing.
But it's desirable is that it makes it optimizes the user experience with your site.
And you said it compiles it down to one page. It minifies it to one page, so you make one request and you get all the information you need.
Right.
Is that correct?
You can specify that in the config.
What if you were to go to like a route and it would render a new page, right? It's a separate page.
Well, I didn't say it compiles down to one page. I said it can reduce the whole, like all the JavaScript files you have to a single file. How you serve that file is up to you. Right? You can serve it. You can have a page which has that file. You can have multiple pages which serve that file. That file can be served by itself, obviously, right? So it has nothing to do with the API or anything like that. It is just a way to create this compressed JavaScript file or CSS file or any other file that is used in your front end.
Okay.
So like
Remember, node can listen for any number of routes, regardless of the path. So you could take a non-node app potentially and make a node that can listen on many different things.
It'd be worthwhile to look at some of the different types of configuration.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at it.
Sure. Let's look at the webpack page. Oh shit! I did not want to search for JSON.
Now that the news told me Meteor sucks, I gotta find a different.
That Meteor,
platform.
you were allowed to like code for different mobile.
Yeah, Meteor, 5 meters, and it's good to me. He said it sucks. So I
Right. So it's basically an asset bundler. So you can bundle like your different assets that you have.
Oh.
So let's look at the documentation. Right, so when Webpack processes your application, it recursively builds a dependency graph. So that's another thing, right? So like when you create your Webpack config, you have to give it an entry point, which means that where do I start? What is the root of my application? And then based on that root of your application file, that file is going to require other files, and those other files are going to require some other files. So it builds this giant dependency graph. So if there happens to be some files which are never used, because you never required them in any file, right? You had some stale files, you'll never include them in your bundle. So that way you always get, your bundle always refers to code that is mostly being used.
So it's basically requiring your app.js or server.js as the entry.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. Right, so you have your entry point here, specified like that. So this is an example of a Webpack config. Right, so the first thing is an entry. And the output, so you have to specify like what kind of output am I generating. So then you have to give it either a path or a file name.
That one will end up in the disk.
Right. So in this case, it's going to end up in the dist, and then the name of the file is going to be whatever you give it. Right. And this is going to be the combination of all the files that it built in the dependency tree that it built while it was trying to require all of the other files. So then you have this idea of loaders, which I was saying, that you can like use other languages in your project. Like SCSS is a different language. Because like Webpack, as it says, only understands JavaScript. But you can give it this loader and be like, oh, this is how you actually read this other syntax, essentially.
So that converts into JavaScript.
No, it will convert it to whatever the loader will convert, is specified to convert it. So the loader will have the rules of conversion. So you would have a CSS loader, or you have an SCSS loader.
Can you expand this to other languages like Python or Ruby or that?
Probably.
That what?
No, I don't think that's the point of this. Like if you, I mean, potentially you could have like, you could write like Python and then Python can transpile down to JavaScript. Sure. But I'm not sure if Webpack has loaders for that. You can check it out. So.
Oh, I'm just like still.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's check it out.
It's not that scary.
Yeah, it's not that scary. I just want to understand like the this.
Yeah, there's a Django Webpack loader. I don't know what that is. Use Webpack with Django. So Django is a Python web framework. Actually, no, this is the opposite, where you're using Webpack to generate bundles for Django. It's not like you're using Django to transpile down to something else. So Webpack is just a tool, right? To like build like your assets.
Okay.
So it can be used in conjunction with other languages as well.
Was that it though? Is the last part of it?
No, there's some other stuff.
What is a hot loader? Is that a thing?
So hot loader is when you, in development, you want your files to be generated really quickly, right? Because every time you change a file, like you change like, let's say, users.js, and it has to rebuild your bundle, that's a slow process. And what you want is to incrementally build your bundle. So hot loader, like incrementally, like automatically runs the bundle command every time you save a file. So it's listening on your file system to see like if any changes, it only it triggers that command. And secondly, you want to iteratively build the bundle.
So it's similar to NodeMon for Webpack bundle.
Right, exactly.
Just like the React starter kit has it. Like
Yeah, React starter kit probably automatically has it built in because it uses its own server on the hood, right? Yeah.
And that's it. Entry, output, and modules.
And there's plugins that you can use.
Cool.
So it's used to perform actions and custom functionality. So what is an example of a plugin? Let's look at a plugin. Most plugins are customizable. So Uglify.js plugin. So this is what I was saying, where it like takes all the long variables and makes it like really short.
Oh.
So that's like basically uglifying your JavaScript.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, not too bad.
Thank you for explaining.
So like, for example, like you may want to like build like your HTML template too. You know how has everyone worked on React apps here, or at least had some familiarity? On React. So in React, like there's this idea, I guess not in React, in a single page application, you have this entry point, like a single page that you go to, and that basically like has to like ensure that it's requiring the bundle file and all of that, right? What's that?
Like a Ruby React app.
Yeah, kind of like that, but like the file which loads the bundle.js. right? Like the HTML file which loads the bundle.js. That's the only file which has that reference as a script tag. So this auto generates that file, for example.
Oh, so you don't even have to make it.
You have to have this fake. This is a template, but then it uses the template to build it, so it automatically has the right path to the file, to the bundle.js. So if you decide to change the path to something else, it will automatically change the path here too. Cool. How's the tension doing? You good?
Good. I'm good.
Oops. Okay, so course request. So does everyone know what? I see why and how. Does everyone know what a course request is?
Is it using something other than like HTTP protocol to make a request or something? I don't know.
That's when the script makes a request to another host, and it's the permission for that your source to actually connect and do certain functions like get, post, put, delete on that separate code. Because potentially it could be a very bad thing connecting behind the scenes to a server to manipulate through the API or whatever. So you can say only the same domain only the same domain can contact scripts on the domain, or you can say other hosts can contact.
Right. So I think what Steve is like going with is like accurate. It's mostly a security feature for the browser. So if there's no reason why I can't use Postman to make any request to any server. I can do that. I can just like build a request and just send it across. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. But the moment I get onto the browser comes with certain security features that it doesn't allow HTTP requests to go to a different domain, especially post requests, to go to a different domain other than the domain that the page is currently in. So if I'm at google.com and I try to make a post, like if I have a form on google.com and if I try to make a post request to like Twitter, the browser is going to disallow it.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
By default, right? Because the server doesn't, it's not accepting, right? Twitter doesn't want to accept requests from Google, right? Twitter's like, I don't care about Google. But if the Twitter and Google has a partnership, right? And Twitter now says, okay, I'm going to accept requests only from Google, and like obviously from Twitter itself, but like outside of Twitter, I will accept requests from Google. Twitter can like set a header in the response called accept. I forget the exact thing. It's like accept course cross origin. Here's a header that the server sets. Access control allow origin. Yeah, this is what it is. So this was going to be set by Twitter. And this is going to like, so this the value of this is either star, which is like I allow everybody to make post requests, or specific domains. And if the domain matches the current domain, then the browser is like cool. So actually what happens is there's two requests that you got. There's actually a request called the options request that actually gets sent out first. And the options request indicates, is basically some sort of do I have permission request, saying that I want to like make a request to this domain, do I have permissions? And then the responding server responds either with okay or denied.
That's not part of the header. That's a completely different request.
Right. So CRS options. Yeah, so this, I guess it's called a pre-flight. I've heard that term before.
should happen in Echo, which is fine.
Oh,
It's
pre-flight.
the sync back to HubSpot is seamless, but I've nervous that I
Yeah.
have seen the same feature.
So the cross-origin resource sharing standard works by adding new HTTP headers that allow servers to describe the set of origins that are permitted to read information using a web browser. Right. So the example here is Twitter and Google. So if somebody's on Google and is trying to use the console to make a post request to Twitter. Right. At this point, what happens is the browser will send a pre-flight request, which is like basically asking Twitter that is it okay for somebody from who is on the Google domain to make a post request to you. And this happens via an options request. And once that request is approved, which basically the Twitter server is going to respond by saying, these are the acceptable domains that I am okay sending me post requests. So if the value in that list includes Google, then the browser is going to be like, okay, you have been accepted. Now you can make that post request.
But did it also say GET requests as well?
No.
No. GET requests.
Get requests can be made like without any.
Oh, other than GET.
Yeah.
Or
Post is supposed to modify.
yeah, post is more.
So, and you use this, I think I was using this in a project wrong for a very long time. We were sending like, at one server sending JSON somewhere, and then you can process it because you just get that JSON and put it in another app. So
Right.
we were using it before.
Yeah. So then that means that other app should allow this domain.
Access to manipulate that data.
Yeah. So you have to, when you create every request should send back a header saying allow cross origin request
Thumbs up.
with this value in there. So.
And it defaults to no, but then you make the setting like true or something.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is also like, what about the idea?
Yeah. So to summarize, Twitter has to send back a header called allow access control. What was the name of the header? Keep forgetting. Allow access control origin. Allow origin. Right, and this should contain the values of all the domains which are acceptable, which can make post requests to that server. So only if Google is in that list will the browser allow Google to make a request to Twitter.
Does it only make the for post requests, or does it?
It's only for post or put requests.
It's only for post.
Only for destructive requests or anything other than get.
So this would be used in like not post OAuth or something, like Google's OAuth their user posts. So there's some kind of cores there.
So in that case, there's mostly only GET requests happening, right? There's exchange of information. Yeah. There is like a lot of information happening, but it's not a post request. They GET requests being sent across.
So what happens? I've noticed some web pages have like Twitter like tweets on it, right? And then you click the follow me or follow button, and it will update and then follow your Twitter. Like it will make your Twitter account follow them.
On different pages?
Yes, on a Twitter page.
So that's using JavaScript embedding JavaScript on your page. So Twitter has a bunch of widgets that it has, and that's basically loading like a Twitter widget onto different pages.
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah.
And that has requests because that widget origin is Twitter. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if it could potentially be making a post request. I'll have to look at that widget, but it's most likely it's not making a post request when you click on the follow.
Then how would it know that? How would it update my following?
Yeah, because so most likely, like I'm not exactly sure how that works under the hood, but it's most likely something to do with like it will send across your cookies to Twitter, and based on that, it will know that you are the one who is signed in, Or even to load that widget, it will recognize you based on whether you're logged in on Twitter or not. So it will automatically have your identity in that widget. So when you click on follow, it will know that you are actually trying to follow that person.
Or maybe you can look like it's expired. I don't know because it's weird. It's like I may not have logged into the app for a long time, but it's still shared. Like my SoundCloud, for instance, I hadn't signed in for that for months.
Yeah.
Updated your SoundCloud, so like your cached cookies or something.
No, it's probably that. Yeah, the cookie may have been valid for like many months. So you're always logged in. Right. So
Maybe they give you an extra one for the widget.
No.
Well, because you could have your cookie and then you could go, you could not return to that website and that cookie could still live in your browser for an indefinite amount.
Unless you explicitly clear your cookies, they live for how long they are valid for. Right. So you can check your cookies and be like, do I have SoundCloud cookies? Or if you open a new incognito window, for example, and go to the same page, it will have no idea who you are.
Are you saying that on host A you can use script to find out if it's the person within the host B if it's not on host A?
Say that again?
So if you're on hosta.com website, you can check that person's cookies to see if they've been on hostb.com on a different host than host A.
Yeah, you can.
The script, I mean.
The script can only read cookies that have been. So again, so there's like cookies have like different kinds of cookies. There's like HTTP cookies and non-HTTP cookies.
Okay.
HTTP cookies cannot be read by like JavaScript. They're only sent across when you make HTTP requests. And this is where you have session cookies. You don't want session cookies to be read by JavaScript, for example.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Right?
Other than your own domain.
Right, other than your own domain. And that automatically happens when you're making HTTP requests. If you're making requests to your own domain, the cookies that have been set by that domain automatically get sent across to that domain. Right, so your session cookies, for example.
So the widget has access to twitter.com cookies,
yes, because
even though it's not on the twitter.com site.
Right, because the widget, the resource was loaded from.
Oh, right. You're right.
Twitter.
Okay. I understand. That's the connection. It has to be reloaded.
Cool. So I think I was talking about something I forgot what I was going to talk about. Yeah. So we were on course request. Yeah. So how are everyone doing on course request?
Pretty good. I remember pre-flight.
Yeah.
Pre-flight.
Oh yeah. So options and pre-flight. Right. That's where we were.
I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like I need to like work with it to actually like do that. Okay, this is the pre-flight. The only thing is like, can we access the pre-flight like request object, or is that like?
I mean, you can explicitly make an options call. If you're using the fetch. Have you ever used the fetch method in JavaScript?
That's what I was researching earlier today.
So one of the method types it can use is options. And it actually sends back. Actually, you can even check this out. So let's try doing it on the command line.
So that's usually used when you want to third-party API, or in this case.
It's anytime you use XML HTTP request, right? Or it can be replaced.
Sorry, I kind of like lost track.
Oh yeah, sorry. So fetches, as far as I knew, fetches were used when you're going to a third-party API.
I mean, fetch is just a way to make asynchronous requests from the browser which support the fetch method.
I guess I'm confused. There's fetch, Ajax, and.
So fetch is the modern Ajax.
Oh, okay, so they're all.
So fetch is Ajax 2.0. Like jQuery Ajax is what you're talking about? Yeah.
Same thing, just future version.
So let's see.
You would basically like have a report where you would pull that list and then all the contact cards you want to see. So I can show you that. I can pull some of the like every building and give you the auto finish.
What are the options?
The data actually started phase 2, the data actually started phase 3, the data actually started phase 4. How many times they took each review, whether they were accepted or not. You know, and frankly, like, as reason, that's why I look at it.
Using options.
You know, once at phase 5, what were the
Option star.
But it would be like a report, the interface would be a report. It's not like, it's not there's like a user profile, like it is.
Minus I. Yeah, so let's look at some website which is like, I don't know, SoundCloud.
No face.
So SoundCloud.
It's all better.
So 404. So they don't even have. So not all of like the websites will support cross-domain CORS, for example. So it's hard to. Yeah, that's. Oh yeah, here you go. Twitter does it. So it's saying it allows get and head. Oh, method not allowed. I see. So it doesn't even support it. Interesting. What is head? Only the headers. Interesting. So what you notice, like I tried to make an options request to Twitter, and then it says 405 method not allowed. So it doesn't even allow the method options. It only allows. So that's cool, where it like tells you what are the allowed methods.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Like we need to find.
Or like a video site, like J-Rob said, they use cores a lot at his old job, whatever video companies.
Yeah. I mean, Codes is like shouldn't be used that much, ideally, because like when you're programming, you're mostly working in, within your company's domain, and then if you have multiple services, they would all be on the same domain. So ideally, you shouldn't be using Codes.
Imagine with videos, it's like a storage thing. They probably don't want to hold all the all the moving around.
Right. Like I can think of one example where I used Cars before is like at my previous company, we were like a SaaS where we integrated with like different like my websites. So we were like a JavaScript library that got loaded after the page loaded, and we were collecting events on what people were doing on page. Every time a user clicked on something, we would like make a call to our backend. So we would use CORS at that point because from that page we were making calls to our backend. So then we used to so an options call used to go and a post call used to go after that.
Okay. Mission resolved.
Cool. All right, so being dry when using require, not wanting to repeat myself. So that is actually, so especially I could think of a situation in like tests, right? Like in your test, you're requiring chai and maca and like, expect and like maybe loading like your helper files. It's totally fine to have like some sort of another file which is like setup, which just loads everything because I know that I'm going to explicitly load these 5 files in one place and then use it in this other file.
Like a testing config file or something.
Sure, like setup is usually like a good because it's like initial setup for your tests. But yeah, but some name that indicates that it's like a like it's happening before anything else is actually happening. But that's totally fine. You can do that.
Okay.
But I would recommend not doing that for source files, like which are like because you don't always include the same 5 files in each of the files. You may have 1 or 2 repetitions.
Is it not doing it for source?
Like in your test, this kind of thing would make sense because you kind of are including the similar files across all of your tests. Like you're including jar, you're including mocha, you're including like some other helpers. But that's very unlikely that you're doing that in your source files. You're never including the same, requiring the same files in all of your source files. You may have like 1 or 2 files where they may share some similar files.
Well, I have the entry point for the Node app, and I'm using Express Router in a subfolder in separate route files. And there's so just using that for example, that's 2 places that I have to load Express and well, at least Express, maybe I can get away from that. But Express and route and the router setup in both places, for example.
So something like this. And then you're doing Express or router.
Yep. And then let's say it loads like I'm doing an FUs for, let's say, admin in my case. And then I have a separate file for all the admin routes.
Yeah.
There I also have to say Express equals require Express and router equals Express route. That's just a really simple
Sure, like,
example.
yeah, but I wouldn't imagine many situations where that is happening.
Okay, so that,
Right, so there's sometimes its abstractions are good, but like sometimes like you're abstracting so much that then you lose like the point of the abstraction.
okay,
Sometimes.
okay,
So in this situation, I would say like what is a better refactoring here? Like at least in this example is like you don't really need router,
okay, sure.
right? I mean rather Express. You can potentially just say router is equal to require Express dot router, for example.
Okay.
So you can get rid of like some of the redundant like requires.
Right.
That would probably be a better refactoring. But if you think that I haven't looked at your code, so I don't.
Yeah, I'll have to make.
But if you, and I believe you, like if you think that there's like a lot of repetition, definitely try to find ways to refactor. But refactor in a way which is like clear as to like what the intention is, right? Like so, for example, I say var like init. I don't know. I'm just like making up a name. Init requires is equal to like you're just requiring this massive 1 file, which requires all other files. And then everywhere you would then have to do init requires dot express and init requires dot thing. That is not potentially always good because sometimes things are stateful, right? And you always want a local. The example I'm thinking is you always want a local route, like a new router for each route, because router dot post and router dot get are destructive operations, like in the sense like stateful operations, where they change something. So if I have if I'm sharing the same router across many files, this wouldn't quite work because I would have a router dot post for slash, and then there's a potentiality that I could have another router dot post for the same route in a different file.
But I thought the example that we were showing a while back, like on the main page, you're requiring that router file, and so it becomes like I don't know the proper word, but it's at a sub-level, it's at a certain path other than the root path.
Right, so absolutely. Like, so the way I would like require that is, let's say I had an index file. So this is what you're saying, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I have this, and then let's say I have router.use users.
Right. Just like that. So you're
but
saying there'd still be
right, because inside this file, I mean, this context is basically this file on the left here, right? So so context itself is exporting a router,
right?
And if I'm sharing the same router across different files, right? Then if I have a router.post slash in here, I cannot have a router.post slash in another file because it would override the same route.
Well, I didn't know that. I thought they were kept
Yes.
separate from two different lines.
So they're separate from this perspective of this router because here is going to be contact slash search, and let's say both of these routes had search. Let's say, right? So the route here would be slash contacts slash search, whereas the route here would be slash users slash search. Right? So far we're good. But within this file, both of them are just looking at slash search.
Right. I'm with you completely.
Right. So in this file, if I'm requiring the same router across both the files, and both the files are changing the same router, it's going to override itself. Because when I require both these files here, if I say const users equal to require users, it's going to read these two files first. Right? So it's going to evaluate these two files. First time this evaluates, my search route is going to be the contact search. The second time it evaluates, it's going to override it. It's going to be like, oh, I found another. Actually, it's not even going to override. It is probably going to add another one, which is, oh, there's another route for slash search.
And those aren't tiered under separate objects somehow?
No, it's still the same object. It's still the same object because it's the same router being exposed. So when I append this router to this router here, the slash search function would correspond to the first function, which is in the contacts file, and in the users file, it'll correspond to the same function, which is the contacts.
So it's going to run contact search and not user search.
Exactly.
I think you need to instantiate another instance of Express router.
Right.
So you have one at your root level, right? That your entire app is using. And then in this file on the right, that router is appending slash contacts and then appending the new instance of the router that you defined in the contacts page. And then on line 13, it does the same thing, but it appends it to slash users, and then that new instance of Express router.
Okay, I didn't know that. I thought I was supposed to share one.
So the analogy is like if you have a box, right? And if if something is inside the box, right? Like so the case is like every time I create the search route, I put something inside the box. And if the same box is being shared across different people, both those people are going to get the same thing out.
Okay.
Right? Even though the first person put something into the box and closes it, and now the second person wants to put something into the box but cannot put something in there because there's already something in there. What I want is an empty box so that my stuff can go in there too.
So I misunderstood the instructions, and I thought the whole point was to use one object throughout and keep it character.
Cool. Glad you brought up that tension then.
Okay, I've learned 5 things.
Cool. So does that answer the question of when to use being dry but required?
Yes, I'll have to go back and probably refactor some.
So just make sure when you're being dry, you're not the intent remains the end result remains the same. They're not changing the behavior, underlying behavior by refactoring.
Okay, I'll have to look at it.
Right, which is So I guess if you had tests, you could potentially catch that issue really.
I just haven't got to the second round.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Can I give you a question for next time you meet, so I don't forget?
Totally.
Can you just put it in the queue for next time? My question next time we meet is, no, don't. I was going to ask you about 5 seconds. That's fine.
It'll come to you. Cool. So let's move on to the next one. So how does Istanbul measure code coverage? Keith, so most of the code coverage tools basically keeps track of what were the files, lines of code that it entered, or what were the blocks of code that it entered in the different test cases, right? So if you have a function which has the good example was what Ben was talking about, which is if you have if-else blocks, if you have 5 or 6 if-else blocks, and your test only checks the first condition, then your code coverage would only be the ratio of the lines covered by the first if condition versus the remaining ones. So if you have like 5 if conditions, it would be like 1:5. Right, so it would be like you have 20% coverage in that line. I'm sort of trivializing at this point, but like that's how it would compute the number. So you have to make sure that if you really want 100% test coverage, is like all of your different pieces are triggered. All of the different code parts are triggered.
So we have one too that's like some like tests for all the routes or whatever, and then in our readout showing 0% in the test.
0%?
Yeah.
So you say you have a test which is explicitly testing a file, and then Istanbul is recording 0% for that test.
Yeah, and it's like I understand the part where it's like, okay, you have 15 functions in a file, and you're only testing the if condition, or the positive, you're not testing the other condition. Then it wouldn't be 100%. I understand, but like, and you should show something like if we've tested the database query, and we're also testing the route to calls that database, we should have some coverage.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe I haven't used Istanbul that much, but like maybe there's some sort of config that needs to be correctly set, because of which it's not able to like get a sense of like what is the file and like all of that. So maybe we can do a coaching session after this to understand the problem. But usually that's how code coverage tools work, where they like have to like actually execute that code path to say for sure that it's being covered. How's your tension holding? Cool. All right. Last one we have.
I remember.
Okay.
Before I forget again.
Yeah.
Not today necessarily, just sometimes.
Okay.
Is there any way to absolutely protect JavaScript code?
Actually, let me
Or is it impossible just because of the nature of the maps and stuff? In your opinion / Thank you.
Okay. So Jeffrey, so UI tests, do UI tests test functionality, or are they a bunch of steps? So since UI tests are like very expensive to write, you're basically what you're mimicking is the behavior of a user, right? What would a user do on your website? So think of like, oh, as a user, I would like to create, like, let's say the contacts pay application, since everyone is working with that. Like, as a user, I would want to create a contact and see that the contact information exists on the page. And that's a user story. So a UI test would be literally all of that. All of the different steps that are needed to make that assertion true.
So, like, essentially, I know there's a portion of the UI testing where you actually use CSS selectors to, pretty much create what the user's doing. So, if you have a more complex system, more complex app that deals with a lot of information intake or whatever from the user, you would orchestrate all the steps to do all the functions of your app. So if there were a step to your app where it like took your heart rate and it like took your height and all this stuff.
You mean like it inputs the heart rate?
Yeah,
and
like
the
in different steps.
Like it wouldn't send a robot and be like, send robot to Jeffrey. Yeah. So every test would. So also another thing to note is like, in my opinion, is like every test should be self-contained. It shouldn't rely on some external data or some external state. So if your test, for example, needs to take input from about the height and like heart rate, then that's something that should be as part of your test. Where first I enter this information into my system so that I have a record of it, and then I use this information to do something else that your app may do.
Like, I guess the thing that makes me think, well, I say instead of thinking it as individual steps, it might be more like a story. Because like, what if you have like a redirect based on their previous entry? Like you have a bad heart, like a good heart rate as opposed to a bad heart rate for
Yeah.
progression to this page.
Yeah.
That whole story versus this whole.
Yeah, that's a totally valid user story. It's like if I have a bad heart rate, then this should happen. If I have a good heart rate, then this should happen. So those are two separate UI tests.
Okay.
And each of those tests are like, creating a record for the heart rates. Like, it's not like it automatically has a good heart rate or bad heart rate. You create the data that you need for a good heart rate. You create the data that you need for a bad heart rate in each of those respective tests. And then both of those tests do whatever they have to do after that. Does that make sense?
When you say UI tests are expensive, does that mean that we should do less of them, or should we still aim to have like 100% test coverage for UI testing? Because even though they seem expensive, there seemingly seems to be the ability to have multiple user stories. Like, user goes to this route from this page, or user goes to this route from this page, but both are on the nav bar, which is on every page. Right. So how?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, how do you sort of manage the distinction between a UI test and some other sort of test, right? Or you could potentially write hundreds of tests covering like every edge case and every thing. Yeah, I would recommend not doing that. Writing hundreds of tests on the UI side of things. Like, have a lot of tests like in your unit functional and end-to-end side, which is testing your apps. Only because UI is something that is brittle and prone to change, right? And whenever you change things, like your tests are going to break in 100 ways because of the way UI tests are so long, where they're like, I will do this and 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 I'll do this. If one step on top breaks, everything else collapses, right? So fixing them is a huge investment of developer work. So you need to recognize which are the paths which are important and need to test.
Okay.
I mean, there is definitely sometimes again, it depends on the nature of the app, right? Like, if your app is like a very UI intensive app and it has all of these different things, I want all of these things to be tested. Then I will put in that effort and an investment in UI. It just depends on the nature of the app.
But like, for example, something could be, okay, one of our, I don't know, we don't have to necessarily go to every page and then click on the navigation bar that renders on every page to every destination on that nav bar. That would be like way overdoing it.
I mean, you could do it. It just, again, depends on how much you want to test your app.
Okay.
Like, if you're used by millions of users, then you would want to do that, because like every time you go down or every time there's a bug reported, then it's lots of money gets lost. So a good example of like how you could so you have to spend a lot of upfront investment in making sure your tests are designed well, right? So like, what makes a test brittle, for example? Thinking of like, oh, if something changes, how many times do I have to change my test code? Like, let's say I decide to change something in my UI. How much time do I spend fixing my tests? So those are the questions you should ask if you decide to write a bunch of UI tests. Like, how expensive is it to maintain? Is it easy to change? How fast do they take to run? Like, so one way to like refactor like some of the tests, the UI tests, is like not hard coding the CSS selectors in your tests.
What? What?
Yeah. So instead of hard coding it, have an abstraction to say this is the header CSS selector, or like this.
So we're doing with the URL.
So this is the header CSS, just like how we did it with the module pattern yesterday, where I have a UI, DOM elements, where each of my element is a function where I can just access. I can, like, when I click on the new contact link, this is what happens. And where is the new contact link? It's just in one page, in a separate file, which has all of the selectors. So when I decide to change like some UI stuff, I only have to modify that one file. And then my tests are much easier to maintain because the tests are still, the behavior remains the same. It's just that the implementation details change.
Oh my God, that's crazy. Okay. No, I mean, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a new level.
The thing that was funky that I noticed with testing is if you have something that's a part of your test that's dependent upon which browser you're on, like is there a special way to test for those things like pop-ups? Like there's no, you can't see the CSS or whatever what that the selectors are for that pop-up.
Yeah, so I think browsers are like, at least like Casper.js we found out this morning, that it has a way for confirming pop-ups. Like, yeah, you may not be able to validate what it looks like because that's based on like that's a browser behavior. But I don't know if you actually want to validate what a pop-up looks like. I don't think you may want to do that, right?
Yeah, the only way it was able to do it was from what it said, but it was really brittle because if you had extra space in there,
right? Exactly. Yeah, so exactly why like they're brittle.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So, like for example, we were doing on the pop-up, and we wanted to test if you clicked yes or if you click no, right? How would we write that? So basically, how we wrote the code was, if this pops up and it has this text, it's a ternary, and then true, click true, or if it's not, then click false. And then that was the successful click, okay, yeah, delete user or whatever. The next time we went to write the code, we wanted to see that the pop-up still popped up. However, we wanted to click no. Would we inverse the?
So I think like whatever library you're using, I think Casper.
Yes, Casper.
So Casper allows you to like say, do I click the yes button or the no button?
Yeah, it just seems really. Really strange because we can't check the content we can't check that we're getting the right pop-up and cancel at the same time. Right?
Okay.
It's really, it seems difficult to.
Okay, so maybe we can look at it together as a coaching session.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, take this off.
Cool. How's the tension holding?
Right.
All right. Cool. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
What? Me?